Thanks for joining us, football fans. We are here for the Pro Football Spot AFC South positional power rankings as set forth by our divisional manager, Jake Arthur. We're going to get right into it. We're going to get down into the thick of things and go through this. Jake, you have your quarterback rankings for the AFC South. Tell me who you had and what order.
All right. Well, I think first and foremost we got to go with the Colts and Andrew Luck. A little bit of surprise here, probably to most, but I have Tennessee with Marcus Mariota and Zach Mettenberger there at number 2. Mariota's got a high ceiling. As I told you a little earlier, he could be Russell Wilson, or he could kind of flop a little bit and be Colin Kaepernick. I like Zach Mettenberger a great deal, even if Mariota wasn't on the team. Behind him, behind Tennessee, I've got Jacksonville and the young gun Blake Bortles. He wasn't super impressive last year, but there were some things to grow on. By all accounts, he's getting better this offseason. And then last, bringing up the rear, is Houston. We don't even know who the starter is going to be. For my choice, it would be Ryan Mallett. I think he's got the best chance to take them where they want to go. But if it's Brian Hoyer, we've already seen what he is. He's really nothing more than mundane.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna kind of be half and half on this with you. Obviously, it's not worth discussing Andrew Luck. He's clearly head and shoulders above the rest of the pack. Obviously, I'm going to disagree with you on Mariota above Bortles. I'm just going to give you that Bortles has, I like that typical quarterback, pocket quarterback guy who has that build and that arm strength. I think he's got better vision. I think he reads plays better than most think that he does. Mariota is such an unproven talent. He is a talent. He could be very shortly above Bortles if he doesn't progress in the next couple years significantly, but I definitely don't have him there yet. And I'm in complete and total agreement with you on the Texans bringing up the caboose there in the AFC South. I think Mallett probably wins the job. I'll agree with you on that, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised if Hoyer did. And I think Savage is probably that lifetime backup there in Houston. I'm going to go Stoney Keeley. He's our Tennessee Titans representative here today. I'll let you go into that. Who you got a quarterback? How you have him ranked there for Jake's rankings?
Well, I don't think there's a debate. Andrew Luck's number 1, but I think I'm kind of with you, Matt. I think I put Blake Bortles ahead of Mariota at this point, and I'm still not convinced that he should be ranked ahead of Mallett or Brian Hoyer. I mean, he hasn't played it down in the NFL. High ceiling, but I still think it's too soon to peg him that highly.
I can get with that. Jake, you got a rebuttal on that?
Yeah, I mean, I got to mention Mettenberger in there a little bit as well, just because even if they wouldn't have, taken Mariota, I would have put Mettenberger above Bortles. It's nothing against Bortles. I think he will be a very good quarterback, eventually top half of the league. He just doesn't have that wow factor to me, and I just like Tennessee's quarterback group, and I really like Mariota's upside. I think he'll probably flash a bit this year because they'll probably incorporate a good bit of the run into it, which will make him look better. They might keep things kind of vanilla in the passing game for him, which will make him look better. And that could ease his transition a bit going into year 2. And, I think he could be he's not as polished as Russell Wilson was coming in, but I think we could be seeing, a 6'4" Russell Wilson here in the next few years.
I think it's totally plausible. Chris Yingling, he's our Houston Texans representative here. What do you think about the list so far for quarterback?
I'm definitely on Jake's side here. I would definitely put Mariota above Bortles. And like Jake said, it's not really against Bortles. We've seen what he can do, and we've seen what his potential is. But I think the sky's the limit for Marcus Mariota. And I think Tennessee's done a great job at surrounding him with talent. I think he's going to have a really great year 1. And as Jake said earlier, having Mettenberger behind him is a huge bonus and definitely puts him at number 2. And I also agree with you guys that Ryan Mallett's going to be the starter in Houston, but he definitely, and the rest of the Texans belong at number 4, bottom of the pack there. So.
Yeah, I think Hunt's going to have a little bit. He'll help Mariota progress pretty quick. Let's move on to running back. Jake, describe your list to us real quick.
All right. Now this was between 1 and 2. It was kind of a tinker situation for me, but I went ahead and gave Houston the #1 spot. I love Arian Foster. I hate that he gets hurt quite a bit, but when healthy, he's always top 5 back when healthy, and he shows it every time that he's on the field. Alfred Blue, came in and did some impressive things there behind him last year. Chris Polk is also pretty good, #3 to have. He'd be a #2 on a lot of teams. Colts, I went ahead and put Colts at #2. They got the boost with Frank Gore. I don't see the longevity that a lot of other people seem to think. I believe he's already 32, so he's not going to have a lot of gas in the tank. I think they'll probably give him a somewhat lighter workload to keep him fresh for the playoffs. But then you have Boom Herron and the rookie Josh Robinson right there behind him. I think everything about Robinson screams Maurice Jones-Drew to me. I watched all his college film that I could find. I just love that kid, and I really like what Boom Herron did last year. And then you're going to have a pretty good battle behind those 3 in camp with Vic Ballard, who a lot of people won't remember because he's been on the sidelines with injuries the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. And Zerlin Tipton wasn't too bad either last year. Tennessee, I really like what they can be, so I put them at #3. I think the offensive line should share a portion of the blame of why they didn't do very well last year, but they don't get all of it. Bishop Sankey can be pretty dangerous, and I really like David Cobb mixing in there. I don't think Sean Green is really going to be around for this season, so I'm not even going to include him, but we all know Dexter McCluster can be a pretty good gadget player. Mm-hmm. And last but not least, Jacksonville. They seem to really like T.J. Yeldon, and he's been getting some attention there in the OTAs so far. Denard Robinson's not too bad. I don't think he's a feature guy, but he did really well for a good stretch last year. Mm-hmm. And whatever mix you want to have of Storm Johnson and Toby Gerhart behind them, Bernard Pierce. That's a deep stable. I don't think all of them will make it into week 1 on the roster, but that's a pretty deep stable right there.
Right. I agree with your list largely here. Although I really think that the Colts and Texans could go either way, to be quite honest with you, and I think that entirely depends on Arian Foster's health. And not even health. I want to say his confidence, because if he loses confidence at any point early in the season, Frank Gore is established. Herron and Robinson could bring up a lot. There's a lot of depth at running back right now for the Colts, and they're in a pretty good situation. For the 3 and 4 spots, I don't know that I could definitively rank either team, to be quite honest with you. I wasn't impressed with Sankey last season, although, as you said, he can be dangerous. I love David Cobb. I think that's more than possible for him to earn the starting spot in camp. Maybe I'm shooting above, but I think that he could be that good. As I've pretty much made it well known, I'm not a big fan of the Yeldon pick. Denard Robinson improved substantially to me what kind of a running back he could be in Jacksonville. I was very surprised with his season last year. He bulked up and also kept his speed. Gus Bradley said the other day after a second day OTAs that Storm Johnson has completely turned his head pretty much, and just loves what he's been doing. He's significantly better than he was. So largely I'm in agreement with you here, but I think I'm going to go ahead and put the Jaguars above the Titans for right now, only because there's danger in Tennessee, but there's nothing. I don't think that anybody proved anything last season. I think the Jaguars with Denard Robinson proved a little more with the Storm Johnson being getting so much love from the coaching staff, and I think the Jaguars line is better suited to run block than the Tennessee Titans is. I think Definitely. Titans are better suited to pass block, and I think that's going to move the Jaguars above them, especially if they can get any continuity out of their offensive line early on in the season. Real quick, I want to introduce everybody since I bypassed that off at the beginning of the show. I'm Matt Danley. I'm your host, and I'm the representative here for Pro Football Spot for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Stoney Keeley, he is for representing the Tennessee Titans. Chris Yingling is representing the Houston Texans, and Jake Arthur is representing both the Colts and the division as a Pro Football Spot's divisional coordinator for the AFC South, or divisional manager, sorry. But let's go to Stoney. Stoney, what's your take on the running back list?
Yeah, I have to put Tennessee last. Bishop Sankey was the first back taken in 2014, and by season's end, people were wondering why. He was compared to Ray Rice, but he didn't really do a lot to really back his stock. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty in Tennessee's backfield, and I think Jacksonville's going to come out looking pretty good. I am a fan of Storm Johnson. I watched him beat up the Titans in the first Titans-Jags game last season, and I'm also a fan of Matt's favorite guy, T.J. Yeldon. So I can't justify having the Titans ranked ahead of anybody at this position.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Chris? Where are you at?
I think I agree. I would initially put the Jaguars in front of the Titans. But I think the big thing that we're looking at is what is T.J. Yeldon going to be. Matt, you've made the comparison of T.J. Yeldon to Trent Richardson, which I absolutely see. But there's a lot of other people who go to another Alabama counterpart and call him more Eddie Lacy.
Right.
So it all depends on what Yeldon's going to be. I would put Jacksonville above the Titans simply because I love what Denard Robinson did last year, kind of coming into that backfield, which was supposed to be led by Toby Gerhart, and just took over.
Yeah.
So I think if that continues, they'll be great. And I'm not on the Bishop Sankey bandwagon at all. I don't like him. The Ray Rice comparison was way too far. I think it could help if they get an actual passing game with Mariota in there and kind of get him on some more third down looks. But for right now, I'm not high on Bishop Sankey. I definitely put the Titans core at the bottom of the list.
Okay. Well, Jake, we got you outnumbered, pal, 3-1.
Yeah.
Got any rebuttal on that might you might try to change our minds with?
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. I think it could be a coin toss on my part between Jacksonville and Tennessee. I will say, without the addition of David Cobb to Tennessee's backfield, that ranking doesn't happen for me. Jacksonville does go above them. I'm just pretty high on David Cobb. Another thing I'm factoring into that is Mariota's impact on Sankey.
Sure.
Those young mobile quarterbacks seem to have a positive impact on running backs.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Alfred Morris became something he was never supposed to be with RG3. You know, he's far exceeded what RG3 has accomplished, and that's just one example. But I mean,
good point.
In general, I feel like those young mobile quarterbacks really bring out the best in running backs. So that's kind of my reasoning there. But I don't disagree with you guys either on that. I think it could go either way.
Yeah, it is a bit of a coin toss, but kind of, you know, a lot of things are changing in Tennessee and Jacksonville, so a lot of that depends on what actually happens in the game.
And those offensive line concerns are fair. I share those concerns for Tennessee. I don't know that they got better really in the offseason, and they already had a bad line last year for the most part.
Right. Let's move on to wide receiver. Jake, read us off your list here.
All right. This was probably the toughest group. The Colts get the top spot just because they're so deep and so good. You know, Andre Johnson, future Hall of Famer, T.Y. Hilton, you know, his career start has already basically beaten that of Marvin Harrison and Reggie Wayne. So sky's the limit for him. Dante Moncrief, you know, as long as he develops as he should be a real playmaker. First round pick Philip Dorsett, you know, he might be the fourth receiver.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a lot of, you know, T.Y. Hilton to him, as a lot of people have said. And Deron Carter, you know, kind of bringing up the rear there. And that doesn't even mention Griff Whalen either. Carter could be pretty good. We don't know, but even if he is, that's the fifth receiver right there.
Right.
Give Jacksonville the number 2 spot just because I really like their young talent, especially led by Robinson. And, they just added to it. Rashad Green is, he's in the mix for 3rd or 4th spot there with Alan Hearns and Marquise Lee. I think that's a really good, young, deep group. The last one, this is really based on what I see happening this year, but 3 goes to Tennessee and 4 goes to Houston. Tennessee gets that number 3 spot because I really like Harry Douglas, and I think that's a really underrated move, but I think he can be a perfect guy there for the slot and, could be their leading receiver even. Kendall Wright with another year under Wisenhunt's system might be better. It was really shaky that first time around, matching him in that system. But Green Beckham, who knows how good he can be, but he may have a Kelvin Benjamin type of season if he can get his feet under him and get back to football. He missed that whole last year. And we're not even talking about Justin Hunter yet. Mr. Potential. And who knows if he make the roster, but Hakeem Nicks is the last guy I just named. That's not a bad 5th guy to name.
Mm-hmm.
And then Texans, someone has to be 4th spot. It's nothing against them. I love DeAndre Hopkins. I don't know about Cecil Shorts' availability because he just always seems to be hurt. The Jalen Strong pick was one of my favorite in the entire draft. I think he's going to be awesome for them. Nate Washington, if he's got some left in the tank, that'll be great for them. I don't know how much he does. But then you kind of have Damaris Johnson and Keshawn Martin there at the end for him. Them not being quite as deep as I feel the other teams are kind of is what puts them at 4th, but it's nothing against them at all. Like I said, that was a really tough position to rank.
I agree. And here's something. You have the wide receivers and tight ends both ranked in the same order through club. Colts, Jags, Titans, Texans in that order. And not solely, but there is a large factor in that regardless of the talent that you see at those cores, and that's at quarterback. Obviously, the Colts are stacked. I don't think there's any debate that they're both tops in wide receiver, and I think the gap's a little closer between tight end. But as far as wide receiver, I think it's a large gap. You got a lot of second-year guys and rookie guys for Jags on there. Rashad Green, I'm worried about. I like his potential, but I'm worried about his dropsies. That's the only thing. He didn't have a whole lot of them towards the end of the season. It seemed like he couldn't focus on the ball coming in off of quick routes. Anything curl past 15 yards, anything towards the sideline looked like he was taking his eye off the ball quick. And I don't know if that's just a bad game or a bad couple games, or if that's a bad habit, so to speak. The Titans and Texans are somewhat interchangeable, but the one thing I like about the Titans, where I may even want to put them up into 2nd place because of the veteran leadership that they have at that position, but I can't because I don't think the quarterback's quite what Bortles is in Tennessee. But I love Harry Douglas. You mentioned that. We mentioned that off air. I think Hakeem Nicks really could have learned from last year in Indianapolis and try to really shine here, because he has Justin Hunter, who like you said, Mr. Potential, but never has actually, done a whole lot with it. I think Kendall Wright's a fantastic talent. I think Dorial Green-Beckham, man, that guy can be dominant if he, gets himself on the right track. But who's to know what's going to happen there? I think Cecil Shorts is overrated. Basically, I love DeAndre Hopkins. I like, but not love Jalen Strong. I like him. Nate Washington, Damaris Johnson, all good guys. However, that quarterback position is going to negatively affect their availability to have any sort of sustained success through that position, I think. So I somewhat agree, but a little bit of a disagree. Stoney, where are you at on that list?
Yeah, from a Titans perspective, they're pretty close with the other teams in this division. One thing I want to mention is that Dorial Green Beckham was pulled out of practice a couple days ago with hamstring issues.
Nice.
So in addition to being out of football for a year, it looks like we're already going to be battling the dreaded hamstring injury. Hopefully, he's got plenty of time to clear that up before the season starts. But we're not even talking about Trey McBride either. The 6th, 7th round pick, I can't recall, out of William and Mary. This looks like it's going to be a pretty deep class. Justin Hunter really needs to step up. I mean, we're in year 3, and he still hasn't reached his potential. As far as Kendall Wright goes, I don't know that it's as much of his ability as it is Wisenhunt not figuring out how to utilize him properly that's holding him back. But the potential there, or the potential is there for them to be really great this season.
Where are you at on that? You similar, Chris?
I'm not. This is the one that I'm not really on the same page as you guys with. Okay, so I'm looking at this list, and I see I'm kind of tiering the guys. Elite, great, not so great, not good. And there are 3 guys on this list that stick out to me as great. 2 of them are on the Colts, Andre Johnson, T.Y. Hilton, and then DeAndre Hopkins. He is a top flight receiver. By the end of this year, there's a very legitimate chance he's top 5. I just don't see a way that the Texans are bottom of the bucket here. And I know I'm kind of in a league of my own here. I love Cecil Shorts. I think he's a fantastic signing, something that the Texans haven't had for a very long time as a slot receiver, which I think Cecil Shorts brings. And Jalen Strong, if he can do something in his rookie season and show the dominance that he showed in Arizona State, I think he could be great. I just don't see him at 4. If they were my rankings, I'd put Texans above Jaguars, Titans at 2, and then slide the other 2 down. But I totally understand where you guys are coming from. It's not a very deep core beyond those 3. They're kind of bottom of the bucket guys. But I don't know. You can't ignore how great DeAndre Hopkins has been.
Interesting. I agree with your knowledge on that. However, like I said, I think a lot plays into that is how much quarterback play is actually helping them be effective, as a supplementary help. But let's go straight into tight end here. Jake, where do you? Well, I mentioned a few minutes ago that you have tight ends ranked in the same order.
Yep.
Do you want to explain that any more?
Yeah, this one, Dwayne Allen, in this one, we can kind of incorporate groups into a little bit more, sort of like receivers, because teams, do flash 2-3 tight ends quite a bit. For the Colts, Dwayne Allen and Kobe Fleener, those are both top half of the league tight ends. Fleener has shown really good growth each year. Dwayne Allen, unfortunately, he just, he's been injured. He hasn't been able to show his stuff. But I think after his rookie year, people started to notice. Even Bleacher Report's Matt Miller ranked him as his number 10 tight end in the whole league just after his rookie year. Jack Doyle, Colts number 3 guy, he's just kind of Mr. Reliable. He's nothing special, but he's a chain mover. He's an H-back who'll get you 5 yards when you need it. He'll lead block for the running back. Jacksonville, I would not have put them at number 2 before the Julius Thomas signing. I know Peyton Manning makes a lot of guys what they are, and I don't think Thomas will be what he was in Denver, but he will be Blake Bortles' best friend most likely. I think he'll still be an upper echelon tight end. And, they go pretty deep there with Mercedes Lewis and Ben Koyak. And then behind that, there's even Clay Harbor. So I think they got a really good quality deep group there. Tennessee might arguably have the best tight end in the whole division, and they're ranked 3rd, And, Delaney Walker, like I said, I really like him. I like Anthony Fasano as well. It's just, as a group, Tennessee isn't as deep as Indy and Jacksonville are. And then the Texans, I don't think there's any question here. Garrett Graham, C.J. Fedorowicz, and Ryan Griffin isn't a very inspiring group. Graham seems to kind of be the starter by proxy, but I think Fedorowicz will make a second-year jump and be the starter. That said, he's nothing too special. but he could be good. But regardless, the Houston's group is, to me, without question, the last one.
I'm going to. I don't even know how to approach it, to be quite honest with you. I love the Colts tight end group. I really love the Jaguars tight end group. Yes, I agree. PFM largely makes marginal guys into superstars or whatever. Um, all Julius Thomas does is catch touchdowns. That's it. I mean,
Yep.
you hear that thing about all he does is win. All Julius Thomas does is catch touchdowns, and that is going to be huge for Blake Bortles' confidence in the red zone. That's going to increase everything about the offense, the running game, short passing game, screen game. I think Ben Koyak's completely underrated. I love that addition. I'm not super stoked about Mercedes Lewis. I think he has what it takes, but I don't know about all. The one thing I think that's being left out here is Neil Sterling for the Jaguars. He is listed technically as a wide receiver, but this dude is huge and athletic and could be that off-pace slot guy that they, basically what Julius Thomas was last year in Denver. If they use more of a double tights setup there in Jacksonville, Delaney Walker, I agree with you, is the best tight end in the division. If you're looking at about exactly how you would build a tight end, you would build them like Delaney Walker, plain and simple. I like the Fasano addition. I think that's great. I don't know much about the Texans group at all, but because of how highly I think about the other three, I'm definitely keeping them at 4. Is there any disagreement between? I'll start with you, Stoney. Stoney, do you agree or disagree with this list? It's kind of hard to disagree with on this one. Stoney?
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear
Yep, there you go.
Okay, I'm just going to run with it. You guys are breaking up on me. So I'm going to – I don't have any gripes with the rankings of the groups. However, I would say that Delaney Walker is the best tight end in the AFC South. I don't think any guy did as much with as little as he did.
Right.
You're talking about a complete lack of an effective offensive line, an atrocious run game, and receivers who couldn't make a difference on offense. So I think he means more to the Titans than any other tight end means to their respective team in this division. The problem is, after Delaney Walker, you don't have anybody. I mean, I like the Anthony Fasano addition. Craig Stevens is going to be coming back from an injury, but those are guys that are going to bolster the rushing attack. They were brought in to block, and that's their specialty. Fourth on the depth chart is going to be Taylor Thompson, a converted defensive end who does have some tight end in his history, but he's a project guy from the Mike Munchak regime that is just on the edge. He's going to be battling for a roster spot. So I don't have any issues with the ranking of the groups at all.
What about you, Chris? You agree, disagree completely, or a little bit?
Yeah, I'm definitely there with all 4 rankings. I think that Julius Thomas is definitely a tight end to keep an eye on this year, especially because kind of what we talked about earlier is, does Peyton Manning make the tight end? We saw it with Dallas Clark. He was a very obvious example of a tight end that was made by the quarterback. And most recently, I think of Jacob Tamme, who kind of had his year flourishing with the Colts, went to the Broncos, and was still good and kind of got overshadowed by Thomas as it went along. I think Thomas is great. I think he's gotten a lot better at route running since he's been with Peyton Manning. I am hesitant to see what he does with a second-year quarterback that's still very raw. But I think if Julius Thomas turns in the same kind of season that he had last season, the Jaguars are easily 2. And then last little note here, Matt, I love that you said you couldn't really comment on the Texans guys because you didn't know anything about them. Not many people do. So, right. I mean, Garrett Graham was meant to be a fullback that they tried to turn into a tight end. They attempted to make him into Owen Daniels when he wasn't.
Right.
CJ Fedorowicz is very, very average. He was drafted way too high to be a blocking tight end. I mean, there's really nothing at the tight end position. Definitely bottom of the barrel.
Moving into offensive tackles on here. Jake, you want to explain your group here?
Yeah. No, I think this one is another one that's probably pretty agreeable for the most part. I got Texans number one because Dwayne Brown has been the man for a while. I think Derek Newton is a really underrated right tackle. The Colts come in at number two because they have Anthony Costanzo, and because Gazzer Chairless is good when he's healthy. He can't play hurt. He's terrible when he's hurt, but when he's healthy, he's pretty decent. So, I mean, it kind of sucks he's hurt right now. Will he be healthy by the start of the season? We just don't know. Number three, you get Jacksonville with Luke Jokel and the addition of Jeremy Parnell. I think Parnell will be a good addition for them because right tackle was just ridiculously just bad for them. It was a revolving door last year. No one stood out. It was just bad. And Tennessee, you have Taylor Lewan. I really like him, and I think he's just going to be incredible in his second year. But who's the right tackle? Is it Stingley, Bell? Is Putasi supposed to be a guard, or is he the answer at right tackle? We just don't know. But, even with Michael Lohr last year, right tackle wasn't anything good for them. So I think that one's another kind of clear-cut one.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with the list as a whole because, well, like you said, because of Anthony Costanzo at 2. I almost want to put the Jags, as almost a 2A there, just because I think that their running game is going to be far more efficient than people are going to give it credit for. Jokel and Parnell, you got Pastor who's coming off, what's he going to do if he's gonna rise like the rest of these guys have been and look that good? I mean, the best thing about them is their core and even some of their depth are very young in Jacksonville, and that's good for them. Costanzo's coming up on a contract year. Gazzer Chairless was awful last year, but I think a lot of the depth in Indy is a little better than it's being given credit for as well. So I don't disagree with the list too much, but I really want to mesh both the Colts and Jaguars together just because I think the Jaguars have a better ceiling at the position this year, because if Costanzo falls in any way, shape, or form, that will pretty much deaden the Colts line. But other than that, I pretty much agree wholeheartedly with your list. Stoney, what do you think about that?
My sentiment is somewhat similar to what we just talked about with the tight ends. I feel like the Titans do have a guy in Taylor Lewan that could end up with one of the top 2 positions on this list if we were ranking individuals. But since we're rating groups, there's no reason for the Titans to be anywhere other than 4. I still think Luke Jokel has a lot to prove. That may have something to do with just his draft position. He was taken so highly, some unreasonable expectations can be set with that. But I still think Dwayne Brown gives the Houston Texans the nod because, Dwayne Brown.
Right. What do you think, Chris? You on board with this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great explanation, because Dwayne Brown. He's been around a long time. He's been really good. And I think it's really underrated how great Derek Newton has been, too. He's been there 4 years now, and the guy's just been consistent. Who expected that a 7th-round pick is going to be able to stay very strong and be such a presence on the team? And I agree with Stoney completely. Luke Jokel has a lot to prove to me this year, especially because of that high draft stock. And can he stay upright is another thing that I'm looking at, is because he kind of got gypped in his rookie year, not able to stay up, and I don't think he proved anything last year either. So it'll be interesting to see how he progresses in his 3rd year.
I agree. Moving along to the offensive guard position along the offensive line, Jake, how do you have them ranked?
All right. With the addition of A.J. Cann in the draft, Jacksonville gets the top spot, and I believe it was you today who pointed out that Zane Beadles actually seems to be on the ups.
Mm-hmm.
So, between Linder, Can, and Beetle, they could be pretty good. The Colts come in at number 2. Jack Mewhort he's going to be a 10-year starter on the line. He's never going to be, a top guy probably, but he's going to be Mr. Consistent, always going to be good. Todd Hermans should be, as long as he stays healthy, should be a pretty good addition. Even without, I think Ben Heenan, he's a Canadian Football League import, yet another one for the Colts. I think he could be pretty good. They're relatively deep as far as role players go. You got Hugh Thornton, who was a third-round draft pick a couple years ago, and then there's Joe Wrights, just to name a couple. The Texans, expecting a sophomore rise from Xavier Su'a-Filo. That gives Texans number 3, and then Brandon Brooks, he's not too bad himself. The Titans, I do like Chance Warmack, but Andy Levitre is kind of bringing the group down. You kind of have to also factor in what does Jeremiah Putasi bring to that group if he's made a guard. It's for the Titans. It's they have quality players there. It's more of just show me what you can do for the most part.
I'm going to agree largely, but I think I don't know. It's hard for me to put AJ Can above Jack Mewhort, even with Brandon Linder there. I like it, but the Colts I think they have more depth at that position than anybody in the division.
Yeah.
You have Mewhort, you have Harriman, you have Heenan, you have Holmes if he doesn't play center. They have a host of options for guard, and I think that along the lines of all the top, I don't want to say top tier, but the credible veteran ability there is going to give them. I think they're above the Jaguars in that. That said, I think the Jaguars are moving up. I think they're doing great at the position. I think they're doing great along the offensive line, and from Gus Bradley's explanation through OTAs, he's loving what he's seeing about guys picking things up, so on and so forth. I'm not going to disagree with you on the Texans or Titans. I'll let these guys do that. Stoney, what do you think about the list for a guard?
I think you guys are being way too gracious to the Titans. I mean, Chance Warmack was ascending towards average by the end of the season, and Andy Levitre might as well just been a speed bump at the offensive line. So I thought it was absolutely awful. The interior offensive line was the weakest component of the weakest unit on the team. If Mike Munchak still coached these guys, they might ask him to suit up and play. 4 is way too high. I don't even know if they qualify to be ranked at this position. It was awful. But I like A.J. Can. He was a guy that I was secretly rooting to end up as a Titan in the draft. So I have no beef with Jacksonville taking number 1.
What do you think, Chris?
It's a good list. I'm a huge fan of A.J. Can, too. I think he's a great player, and he'll be a consistent player for a long time. A little bit raw. He lets guys past him a little bit too often, but I think that's something you can coach up too. So I think he's in good hands. And I think the Colts, I wouldn't put them that high if they hadn't have gotten Todd Herremans this offseason. I think Herremans is a gigantic veteran addition. He'll do a lot, especially in the production of Jack Mewhort. I think Mewhort's good. I think he was thrown in to the fire too quickly with the Donald Thomas injury last year. So I think having a solid guy next to him allows. And speaking of that, Donald Thomas is back. Right. Great depth at guard too. Mm-hmm. And I agree with Jake that Xavier Su'a-Filo will have that sophomore rise to say. And I think the Texans knew that coming in, that he was extremely raw. He had a lot to work with. He was a huge stretch when they drafted him in the second round. But I think he showed progress last year, and with the movement of the line as the season went along, he showed a lot of progress. I think he'll be great. Brandon Brooks has always been consistent. And Stoney, I love how low you are on your Titans guards. I agree. They're not good. Levitre is eating money right now, and Chance Warmack has a lot to prove. So.
I agree. Going along the offensive line down to center, Jake, how do you have these guys ranked?
Uh, well, the addition of Stefan Wisniewski gives Jacksonville the #1 spot here as well. I know they have Luke Bawanko as well, and Wisniewski can play guard. I think it'd be wise to stick him there as the starting center. Texans, without Chris Myers, they were able to let Chris Myers go because Ben Jones should be a pretty good starter for him. He's already shown it before. I don't see any reason why he won't continue to play his heart out. Now, normally the Colts wouldn't rank #3, but like Stoney was talking about, their interior offensive line was not good. The Colts, we don't know who the starter is. Is it Jonathan Harrison, who is prone for critical mental lapses during the game? Is it Khaled Holmes, who for whatever reason just cannot get a commitment from the coaching staff?
Mm-hmm.
So an interesting dark horse situation I've got at center is, what if Donald Thomas comes back in the preseason healthy and plays lights out? Last year during the offseason, Ryan Grigson alluded to Donald Thomas taking snaps at center.
Mm-hmm.
That, they've got bodies at guard. Why not put Thomas at center if he plays lights out?
Right.
And Mr. Brian Schwenke brings up the rear for Tennessee at 4.
I have no problems with the list in the case that Jonathan Harrison, just going list-wise, if Jonathan Harrison starts, I keep the Colts at 3. If Khaled Holmes is, I give him that nod along with the competition. I think that moves them up to #2. I love the Jags at 1. I don't disagree with the Titans at 4. Sorry, Stoney. But I don't think that you will either. What do you think, Stoney, about that center list?
I completely agree, and it's unfortunate because Brian Schwenke was kind of drafted to be the cornerstone center that you can line up for the next 10 years. It hasn't panned out. As I mentioned before, the entire interior offensive line was incredibly weak last season. But you want to talk about dark horses on this list. 2-14 records tend to bring on a lot of change, and just because Brian Schwenke had the college pedigree doesn't mean that Ken Wisenhunt and his staff are going to stay committed to this guy. They drafted a pretty good center in Andy Gallick that I think by season's end could end up taking that job from him.
I agree. What do you think about that, Chris? Do you agree with that list?
Yeah, it's a good list. The Jaguars getting Wisniewski is huge. Mm-hmm. I think it's something that they really needed because they haven't had a consistent center in recent years. So I think the addition of him easily puts him at the top of the list. And then Ben Jones, he's just a solid center. As far as guard goes, he's been great. He was a 16-game starter last year, and he's done great. We don't know what he's going to be like at the center position, but he's turned in a lot of solid performances so far, and I think he's a leader on the field too, which is something you definitely want out of your center, is kind of leading the guys and knowing the protections, things like that, and that's something that Ben Jones brings, and I agree with the rest of the list too. So,
moving over to the defensive side of the ball, Jake, we're going to start defensive end, defensive tackle, and I don't think that anybody's going to disagree with #1 on this list. Why don't you tell us what you got?
Nope. Houston, because J.J. Watt exists in life, they are #1. Jared Crick, right there beside him. We'll bring the Titans back up here. What's that?
Regardless, that second name is absolutely doesn't matter who it is.
Yeah, exactly.
It could be the man, and still.
Number 2, we'll bring Tennessee back up to earth because they have Jarrell Casey, and if it weren't for J.J. Watt, Tennessee would be #1 because of Casey. Mm-hmm. I like Daquan Jones. I like some of their moves that they've made. I think Pato Atua is penciled in as the starter right now, but it could be Jones or the kid they picked up from Auburn in the draft. His name kind of eludes me right now. Jacksonville, it's a bummer about Dante Fowler, but they do still have Clemens and Alualu, and they've got some depth with Davis and Smith, and Branch, not to mention. So they've got some players there still without Fowler. The Colts, they'll go to the bottom of this one. Arthur Jones, he's a better player than he showed last year. I think that ankle just kind of affected him more than we'd like to think. Kendall Langford, I'm intrigued to see if his return back to the 5 technique will kind of bring a renaissance to his career after he was kind of a reserve there in St. Louis in a 4-3 defense. But Henry Anderson, if he starts and if he plays like Matt, I know you think he can play and how I'm warming up to him, he could jolt them up, pretty well in their rankings on defense as far as both pass rushing and against the run. I think Henry Anderson could be a pretty big addition for them.
I agree, and I agree with this. I agree with this list wholeheartedly. But had Dante Fowler, let me put it this way. I agree with this list if Dante Fowler's healthy. Dante Fowler is not healthy, so I would put them below the Colts because of Henry Anderson. I think this dude is going to be a absolute stud. He's going to be a beast long. I think Arthur Jones plays significantly better. Kendall Langford, like you said, the return to the 5 is going to. I really do think it's going to resurrect his career in Indianapolis. I think he's going to look great. I love the Jaguars, what they're doing at defensive tackle, but I just think that Dante Fowler was that critical point, and that's why he was drafted where he was. But other than that, I don't disagree with the list as it stands currently. How about you, Stoney?
Yeah, I'm on board. I think this was actually probably a pretty easy list to put together. Just a couple notes, Jake. The name that was escaping you was Angelo Blackson. He is going to be a project at defensive end. A lot of people think he's better suited to play the nose tackle, but it's just one of those things where it's a toy for Dick LeBeau to play with. And the other day, actually it might have just been yesterday, Ken Wisenhunt's already come out and said that Daquan Jones will be a starter for the upcoming season. So just a couple of tidbits from the Titans' perspective. I wonder if maybe we should re-rank the tight end position, and maybe J.J. Watt might help the Houston Texans out there.
Good point. Where you at on that, Chris?
Yeah, I'm completely good with it. I think J.J. Watt's the best football player on the planet, so yeah, they better be first. And I think that a lot of people don't know who Jared Crick is. J.J. Watt's definitely the heart and soul and the poster boy of that defense. But if J.J. Watt doesn't exist, Jared Crick is elite. I really do think that. I think that he's consistently overshadowed by J.J. Watt. I think he's a great defensive end and has kind of worked to adjust to being in the shadow of the spotlight of J.J. Watt. I think he's a great guy, and I agree Jarrell Casey is also in a league of his own and needs to be in that number 2 spot, no matter who the other end he's playing beside is.
I agree completely. Moving inside to defensive nose tackle. Jake, where you got these guys?
Well, despite the torn ACL, Sinderic Marks helps Jacksonville get the number 1 spot, along with the addition of Jared Odrick there. I like that duo quite a bit. And then they added Michael Bennett, which only helps. And he should excel in that rotational role, I think, initially. The Texans, Vince Wilfork, if this was 5 years ago and he was on the Texans, this is number 1 spot, no doubt. But, he's pretty old, but I think he's still got a lot to offer. And not to mention Lewis Nix right there behind him if he can get and stay healthy. Indianapolis comes in number 3. Josh Chapman, he's been solid. He's never been great. But the addition of David Perry kind of helps move this along. And there's a lot of times you see Zach Kerr mentioned as a nose tackle. If he's nose tackle, he gives a big boost because Zach Kerr is a really good player that not many people know about yet. And then Montori Hughes is just kind of there. But them as a group are in the number 3 spot, and then bringing up the rear is Tennessee with Sammy Hill as the primary starter there.
I agree with this list completely. I think I agree with what you said, Vince. Wilfork takes the Texans to number one if this is a few years ago. However, you got Sinderick Marks obviously coming off the injury. I expect him to be healthy. I think that they do too. They really like the addition of Odrick, and they I mentioned today in a piece that the one thing they've had to teach him is he's not there to take up offensive linemen, to take up space. It's a different scheme to where you're not allowing the linebackers to do it. He's going to be one of the guys attacking the passer and the running backs and everybody else. So I think that he's falling into that role really nicely. I think they really like what they're seeing from him. I think that Chapman and Sammy Hill are a bit of a coin toss. Yeah, but I will agree with you with the Colts there over them due to the depth that they have at the position. It's not fantastic depth, but it is depth. Whereas the Titans, on the other hand, are not so lucky. You agree with that, Stoney, with this list in general?
I do, and Sammy Hill was far from the problem for the Titans' defense last season. He wasn't a liability, but at the same time, you don't make a career in the NFL by just not being bad. So I think it speaks to what the Titans think about him, that the guy pushing for his job right now is a fourth-round reach project player in Angelo Blackson. So I think it's a fair list. Absolutely.
Chris?
Yeah, I like what you guys said about Vince Wilfork's 5 years ago. I absolutely put him on top. And it's good to take a reality pill and realize he's not that guy anymore. I think he's still Vince Wilfork. He's a personality on defense, and he takes two offensive linemen. It's just what Vince Wilfork does. I think it's definitely a huge boost, but seeing what Jacksonville has as far as Odrick is a great player. I think he'll be really he'll have a lot of impact. And can Marks come back full health is one thing to really look at, because I think when he's at full health, absolutely Jacksonville takes this top spot. If he kind of loses a little spring in his step, it's tough to put Jacksonville up top, with the Texans having Vince Wilfork and a very promising Lewis Nix right behind him. I agree, Sammy Hill. I really do like Sammy Hill. I think he's a good player that was surrounded by a really bad supporting crew, which, like you said, Stoney, that's no excuse. He still needs to be good. But at the same time, it helps when you have a couple playmakers around you. So I really want to see him kind of rise on this list. And the Colts just have a big old bunch of nose tackles, none of them really sticking out as one that really is great. So I personally would switch the Colts and Titans in this list. So Titans would be above the Colts, but the Colts do have more depth that the Titans don't have.
Okay, let's move on to outside linebacker, and I do not have any problems with the list. Jake, what do you have them the outside linebackers ranked at?
Well, the Colts get the top spot, and that's with Robert Mathis returning. They added Trent Cole in the offseason, and, kind of the third guy is Jonathan Newsom, and he led the team in sacks last year. Even with Mathis and Cole being there, it's already been said, I believe it was Coach Pagano said, Newsom is still going to see the field just as much. He's not going to have his plays scaled back. And outside of those three guys, that's not even mentioning, the first-round pick from a couple years ago, Bjorn Werner, or, the strong side starter of the last couple years, Eric Walden. Outside of that, you got some really quality depth guys with Cam Johnson, the project that is Daniel Odongo, and then the rookie free agent, Zach Hodges, who should have been drafted, and is in all likelihood is probably going to make the roster somehow, among this group of guys. The Titans, the addition of Brian Orakpo helps a lot. If they get healthy Brian Orakpo with a really solid, balanced Derek Morgan, then that's a really good group. I didn't have any problems giving them number 2 at all. Houston, this, it kind of a toss-up a bit. Jadeveon Clowney, assuming he comes back on time and everything, microfracture surgery to the knee, it's not like an ACL tear. In my opinion, I don't think he'll ever be the Jadeveon Clowney people thought he was going to be now because of that surgery. But they do have Whitney Merciless as well. And I've seen some rumblings of, maybe the rookie second-round pick Benardrick McKinney gets some play at outside linebacker if there's an injury to fill. So I don't have any problems with that. And then Jacksonville comes in at number 4. It's not that they're bad. It's just of the division, they're 4th. I like Telvin Smith. I'm not huge on Dan Skuta. I think he's okay. But if I were them, I would have done more to address linebacker. And that's how outside linebacker shakes out.
What do you think about that list, Tony?
Well, I don't know if I'm quite ready to put Brian Arakpo and Derek Morgan at number 2 just yet. Maybe it's my SEC bias down here in Nashville, but I'm still salivating over the possibility of what Jadeveon Clowney could do in Houston. And with the combination of Whitney Merciless, I think I'd still have them at 2 for now. But the caveat being, if Brian Arakpo is healthy and the good Brian Arakpo, then I wouldn't be shocked if this unit ended up number 1.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with that. Moving to inside linebacker, I think you're going to get some disagreement with this unit here, Jake. Where you got those guys ranked?
More than likely, I give Tennessee the top spot because Zach Brown is returning, and then even despite that, I like the combination of Avery Williamson and Wesley Woodyard. I think Williamson's going to have a really good second year. Woodyard has always been pretty consistent, but Zach Brown was supposed to be something pretty good too. So with him coming back, I'm not quite sure who the 2 starters will be, just because those are 3 high-quality guys who could start. But I really like that group. Have the Colts in at number 2. Terrell Freeman has been one of my favorite linebackers since he joined the league. Dequel Jackson, he had some hard struggles last year. It was rewarded with a Pro Bowl berth, so a lot of people kind of don't know about his struggles. He's only going to be another year older and another year more terrible at covering the league's best tight ends this year. I like that they've added a couple guys like Nate Irving and if Marlo Herrera can develop.
Mm-hmm.
The Jaguars, Paul Posluszny, he's a pretty good field general, but I just don't have confidence in his durability at his age and everything, and they just don't seem to really want to get much insurance for him other than Jeremiah George, who did play well in Paul's absence last year. The Texans, Brian Cushing, although he's kind of shaken the health bug off and come back strong last year, he's back. I like the addition of McKinney a lot, and then they've also got Tuggle. But for my money, that's how I'd rank them.
And real quickly, I think the only reason I would disagree with your list, if I'm being objective here, is because of the supporting cast along the defense. I think the Texans' inside linebacker core will be more. I think they'll be benefited in the way that they are, on the same defense as J.J. Watt, plain and simple. Jaguars with Posluszny, like you said, injury. You can't really disagree with that. However, the coaching staff does love Thurston Ambrister right now out of Miami, a UDFA, and I think they're expecting some big things from him. I think he's got a real shot to make the roster and to play some quality snaps. Freeman and Jackson, I think that they're kind of because they have the 2 of them, I think they're kind of by proxy the number 2, and I don't disagree with you about the Titans with Woodyard and Brown, Williamson all the way at the top. Stoney, do you have any disagreements with this list at all?
No, I just think it's worth taking a moment to stop and recognize Paul Posluszny. The poor guy, He's in Buffalo for how many seasons, and they're terrible. And then he leaves, and now Buffalo's a contender in the AFC East,
Yep.
and he joins Jacksonville after several years contending for the playoffs, and now the bottom falls out there. Poor guy. With respect to DeQuell Jackson and Brian Cushing, I think he might be the most accomplished inside linebacker in this division. But overall, I'm on board with the Titans at number 1. I love Avery Williamson. I think he was an absolute steal last season out of the University of Kentucky. And I do anticipate Zach Brown to be the other starter, guy that was in the running for Defensive Rookie of the Year when he entered the league. So it's going to be a pretty good 1-2 punch from that position.
Chris?
Yeah, no issues. But I absolutely agree that this entire inside linebacker list is kind of a coin toss because there's every team has its great parts inside linebacker, but each team also has wait a second, let's take a look here. As far as the Texans, I think Brian Cushing is, in my opinion, the best pound for pound inside linebacker in the division. The problem is making sure that he's available for games. He's a glass cannon. The guy gets injured way too often. But I think when he's there, he's great. He's as great a field general as they come. It's tough seeing his name at 4, but I absolutely understand why. I mean, there's a huge injury risk there. We have no clue what's going to come out of Benardrick McKinney. And the rest of the defense, or the rest of the division, is graded inside linebacker too. So, yeah, no issues with the list.
I actually think that the Texans are going to want to get rid of Benardrick McKinney. This is just my way too early prediction. I really think they're going to want to rid themselves of him. I don't think that he benefits. I don't think that they benefit from his coverage skills in any way, shape, or form, and I don't think that he's got the. I don't think he's got it upstairs, to be quite honest with you, to be that inside linebacker for a team like the Texans that are going to pride themselves on defense and stopping Andrew Luck. I really don't. Moving on to cornerback, this is a top and bottom heavy. There's really no in between, no middle ground in these 4. I think 1 and 2 are significantly higher than 3 and 4. Jake, why don't you tell us who you got and where they rank?
Colts come in at number 1. They have Vontae Davis there as their lead guy, who's criminally underrated in the league. When everyone wants to talk about Darrelle Revis and Richard Sherman and Patrick Peterson, no one talks about Vontae Davis or Harris from Denver, and they both should be talked about. Greg Toller had his moments last year. They were early in the year. He seemed to kind of peter off a bit at the end. If Peyton Manning wasn't overthrowing everything in the playoffs, Toller would have been exposed hard against Emmanuel Sanders. Darius Butler, to me, has been one of the best nickel corners of the past few years since being with the Colts. And then they took DeJon Smith in the second round, who, he's probably going to be a starter sometime in the next year or so. I think he's going to be pretty good. Houston is also pretty deep. Kareem Jackson, they brought him back. I thought it was a really smart move. Jonathan Joseph might be getting towards his last legs there, but, they drafted Kevin Johnson in the first round for that sole purpose. I think Kevin Johnson's going to be a pretty good athletic corner, kind of poor man's Joe Hayden. And then there's Andre Howe, who's probably going to make a bit of a jump here in year 2. I like the mix of players Jacksonville has there at number 3. Aaron Colvin was one of my favorite guys in the draft last year. Torn ACL and all. And he came back when he was finally healthy, and he showed everyone why he was considered one of the better cornerbacks. They brought in Devon House in free agency this offseason. And Demetrius McRae, he's also kind of starting to make some noise as one of those, bigger cornerbacks that Bradley seems to like. Dwayne Gratz, although he's kind of a high draft pick a couple years ago, he's had his ups and downs for sure. I think I believe second round pick, we'd probably consider it to be more down so far though. And then Tennessee, Jason McCourty's Mr. Consistent. I don't think anyone can disagree. He's a solid cornerback. Parrish Cox was kind of a lifesaver in my opinion when you consider Bleedy Ray Wilson was the starter. So I like Tennessee's group better than I did last year now, but to me they're still bottom of the division at that group.
All right, I agree. I agree with your list. I think totally. I think there's something that sets the Colts above the above the Texans is the talent that they have battling for, possibly that fifth roster spot in Donald Selsgar, the guy that they just added, Chance Casey.
Yeah.
I think, and then go back to the practice squad for the past 2 years, and you've got guys that have been hanging around that are big and powerful and strong that can play that press man. I think the Colts are. I think that's what actually puts the Colts on top of here. But as far as who's going to play more consistently, their top four guys, that Kevin Johnson addition to Houston was a humongous addition. When you consider Jonathan Joseph and Kareem Jackson just signing that new deal and coming back, I think you've got to love those two cornerback groups for the Colts and Texans. And then I think the Jags and Titans are significantly lower than that. I think there's quite a bit of a drop-off, but I like the Jags, where they're going, what they've done. I like the addition of Devon House. And the Titans aren't too far away. I think Liddy Ray Wilson's going to be better off being in that backup role. I think he's going to actually learn and improve quite a bit in that role. But I don't have any problems with the list in general. I just think it's a really interesting side note to say that cornerback could be one of the strengths of the division this year, when it's been so often the Achilles heel of so many of the teams in the AFC South. Where you at on that, Stoney?
I agree with Jake's list wholeheartedly. There's a common theme here when we're talking about the Tennessee Titans from 2014 and going forward. I feel like I keep repeating myself saying, yeah, well, they have this one guy, but everybody else is just kind of garbage. Jason McCourty is one of the most underrated corners in the NFL, but he needs help. Hopefully Parrish Cox can fill that role, but he's no spring chicken, as they say. Bleedy Ray Wilson has to stop allowing quarterbacks like Andy Dalton to catch passes and run them in for 15 yards for touchdowns, dropping pick sixes, stuff like that. So got a lot of talent there, but something needs to materialize from it before the Titans can advance on this list.
What about you, Chris? Where are you at with it?
I completely agree with the list. Stoney, I want to echo you real quick. I think that Jason McCourty needs more attention for what he's done with nothing around him. I think he's a really good cornerback and definitely belongs in the top tier of cornerbacks. He just needs help. And one thing I like saying for the cornerback position for the Colts, it's a good feeling to not see Josh Gordy on that list. I love that he's gone. I think his departure really improves the Colts in a weird way. And Jake, you're absolutely right. Jonathan Joseph is in his last leg. I think that's what inspired the drafting of Kevin Johnson. They're very similar players. They play like each other, and I think when you have the more experienced Jonathan Joseph kind of passing on his knowledge to Johnson, that it's going to help a lot. I think it's a good list, and I think it's very cut and paste, like Matt said. You have the Colts, the Texans, and a huge drop down for the Jaguars and the Titans.
Let's move on to safety here as we're getting onto our borders. How do you have these guys shaken out, Jake?
Oh, my top spot was a little conflicted, but Houston, I give them a slight nod with Raheem Moore and Stevie Brown. That is with banking on Stevie Brown going back to the Stevie Brown of a couple years ago. I believe he tore his ACL last year. Raheem Moore has shown growth with his later time in Denver. He's not just the guy who led up that game-ending touchdown against Baltimore a couple years ago. He's really not bad. I think that's a pretty good tandem there. And that's even after they let go of DJ Swearinger. The Colts come in at number 2. Mike Adams was the best safety in the division last year. But he's another guy that's another year older, and I don't think his Pro Bowl year last year was a flash in the pan, but he is older now. Dwight Lowry kind of is penciled in as the other starter right now, but he, for all intents and purposes, he's going to be battling Clayton Geathers. We don't know if Geathers is ready to go yet. He may be, but most likely not. Tennessee comes in. Michael Griffin has been Mr. Inconsistent to me, although, in his heyday, he was one of the better safeties in the entire league. Denoris Searcy, I think, was a really good move, and I think an upgrade from Bernard Pollard. They come in at number 3, and then Jacksonville at number 4. Jonathan Cyprien, I don't think he's quite lived up to expectations with his draft pick, but I think he's getting better. And then James Sample, from what I understand, is the early favorite to start next to Cyprien, despite the addition of Sergio Brown, which is good for Jacksonville because, we're pretty familiar with Sergio Brown, and he's a good fill-in, but he's not the guy you want to, be your constant starter. And then Josh Evans isn't either. So that's how I have the safety shaken out.
And this is kind of a hard group for me to differentiate between the two. As you said, to your point, Mike Adams is a year older. I really believe that we're going to see a combination of Dwight Lowry and somebody else, whether it be McDonald at safety for the Colts or, otherwise. I just really think that, I don't know, I just have a sneaky thought in my head that Adams is just not going to last the year. I just thought it was, I thought he overreached a little bit last year, as he did last the whole year, and was, like you said, quite possibly and more than likely the best safety in the division. Don't like Raheem Moore, so I'd kind of put the Colts and the Texans battle for that. I really like Denoris Searcy. I thought maybe that the Colts would be hunting for him. I like him for the Titans. I think, like you said, Michael Griffin hasn't quite lifted up to his billing yet. But I'm going to put I would put the Jags really close to trying to punch up at the Colts at number 2, to be quite honest with you. I think if there's a year that Gus Bradley is going to be able to get these safeties to play, if you want to say like a Seattle defense, this is going to be the year. They've added the right pieces. They're going to be getting more pressure on the quarterback. I don't think that that's really even debatable, to be quite honest with you. Maybe I think their ceiling is still underrated along the line in their pass rush. I think it's going to be significantly better. With the addition of Sample there, I don't think he's the savior, but I think he is a very nice and physical addition to the safety. And then you put a guy like Sergio Brown in there, who really only got his major playing time last year with the Colts because of the Landry suspension. And he played pretty well. In fact, I think a lot of Colts fans were pretty on board with being excited that he was going to be starting in place of Laurent, even after he came back from his suspension. So I'd put I don't know exactly where I would say that I'd put the Jags, but I would put them above the Titans in that regard, because I think, like I said, it's a whole defensive state of mind in Jacksonville, and I think Gus Bradley is really going to have these guys on point, and I think this is going to be a pretty exciting defense, to say the least, and I think Jonathan Cyprien and Sample are going to be a big part of that. Stoney, where are you at with the safeties here?
I think Jake pretty accurately pegged this list, so much so that I didn't even write any notes for the safety position. So, speaking from a Titans perspective, Michael Griffin has always been one of my favorite Titans. He has been inconsistent, but at times I think he's been somewhat of a scapegoat for the overall bad defense. And a thing that doesn't help him is the fact that his bad is so bad that it's hard to forget. So, aside from the signing of Denoris Searcy, they added an undrafted free agent in Cody Pruitt. It's highly doubtful that he makes the roster because they do have Marquestin Huff and Damian Stafford playing in that defensive backfield with Searcy and Griffin. But overall, I think they've got some pretty good depth, but I still wouldn't put them the elite in the division.
Where are you at with the list, Chris, for safety?
Yeah, it's a good list. I personally would switch the Titans, the Texans and Colts, simply because of the Swearinger and Texans divorce. I think losing Swearinger was huge. Cornell is notorious for using his three safety scheme, letting one kind of float as a linebacker, safety kind of hybrid. So I think now that Houston's starting Raheem Moore and Stevie Brown, there's no viable third. If one of them, God forbid, goes down, you're starting Eddie Pleasant. I mean, you might reach into the undrafted free agent pool and maybe give Curtis Drummond a try. I mean, but there's not depth there. I think when you're looking at the starting two, the Texans would probably take the nod over the Colts, but the Colts have that depth behind, especially with Clayton Geathers. The fact that there's even any kind of positional battle there says that the Colts kind of have more of a certainty at safety than the Texans do.
I agree with that. That's a good point there. I think Geathers actually, like I said, I think that Adams and whether it's Adams whether it's Geathers or McDonald going into that other role side Lowry, even if either one of them go down, if Mike Adams is healthy the whole time, they've got four very viable safeties in my opinion. So we're going to get off of the list real quick, and we're going to come into some more of an impromptu here that none of you guys could study for. Where would we go with the power rankings for head coaches in the AFC South? Chris, I'm going to start with you only because you've been getting the last pick every time. So we're going to start with you. Where do you got the coaches at?
Ooh, that's tough. Okay. I gotta give Pagano first look. I mean, in every year that he's been head coach of the Colts, he's produced a winning season, a playoff season, and I mean, not to mention the Chuck Strong campaign, but he created a persona. He created a visual perspective with the Colts franchise. Tony Dungy did it. Caldwell didn't even touch that, and I think that at least from a PR perspective, I mean, Pagano's a great coach. After that, I think I think I'm going to give it to Wisenhunt. I'm a big fan of Wisenhunt. I think that he's a great coach. I think he just hasn't really figured out how to use his players yet. I think he's a great mind, though. Very offensive-minded. I think it's something Tennessee's needed, but he hasn't really produced because he's been working with something patchwork at quarterback and offensive line. So I give it to him. Gus Bradley would definitely be my third. I think he's a great coach. He definitely has the ability, and he has the pedigree in Seattle as one of those great minds, but I have trouble putting him higher than that because of his inability to produce so far. I think it was a great goal that they had in mind. I think they're still working toward it. I think this is a big make-or-break year for Gus Bradley, though. Yeah, definitely. And then Bill O'Brien bringing up the rear. I think he's good. He produced a 9-7 season with a Fitzmagic conundrum at quarterback. He's good. I don't think he's proven enough yet for me to say he's the top guy.
All right, Jake, this was your list, but this wasn't on your list. So where are you at with the coaches?
I'm going to kind of mirror Chris on that one. I think you got to give Coach Pagano the top spot. When he missed most of that first season there and Bruce Arians came in, most people were on board saying, Bruce was kind of the one who held it all together. And that may have been true, but since then, we've just seen the Colts continue to win, and players want to do nothing but play for Pagano, and free agents want to come and play for him too, and they don't even have to have played for him before. He's done nothing but win since being with the Colts, and it's just been such a short time, so I think you got to give it to him there. Wisenhunt's my number 2 as well. Things haven't been pretty in Tennessee, but I think when he has things how he wants them, they go well. I mean, he's gone to a Super Bowl, and Arizona should have won against Pittsburgh. Number 3 for me also would be Gus Bradley. I like his attitude. I think once he has things how he wants them, they'll be pretty solid as well. Bill O'Brien, he's, he number 4 makes him sound not as good. I think he's going to be one of the better head coaches here within the next couple of years. I like what he has to offer, and I like him kind of as a quarterback guru when he also has the type of guy that he wants, which makes me wonder why also the Texans haven't been a little more proactive in finding a franchise quarterback.
Mm-hmm. Good point. Stoney, what do you think about the coaches?
Chuck Pagano is clearly number 1. I don't think there's any debate about that. But number 2, I'm actually going to go with Bill O'Brien of the Houston Texans. I think to orchestrate a 9-7 season with the mess that he had at quarterback speaks to the kind of motivator of men that he is. And he had that reputation after coming into the NFL from Penn State. So I like what he's done. I think as he implements his plan further, the Texans are going to be back in the hunt of the wild card race. 3, I don't want to rank. I don't want to rank Ken Wisenhunt at 3, but I think I have to just because he's had fewer losing seasons than Gus Bradley. He's very rigid in his play calling. He doesn't seem to utilize his weapons on offense to the best of their ability. He's very much so a you mold for me kind of coach. And so I think that takes him down below O'Brien. And then Gus Bradley, like the guy, great defensive coordinator, but it just hasn't panned out so far. And he's had a couple of pretty bad seasons in Jacksonville. The clock's going to start ticking here before long on him.
I'm in a similar boat to a lot of you. I think on a lot of points we agree, but the main would be that I think that we have 4 really good coaches actually in the AFC South. I don't think that I think it's unfair to say that somebody's the worst in the division because I'm a little sour on Pagano only because Andrew Luck has basically made his early career in Indianapolis, and that's he's now got the defense similar to what he wants, and we'll see if that pays off. But yeah, I still have him on top there. But Pagano is going to possibly slip quicker than anybody on this list and could slip all the way to the bottom because of that. If he doesn't do something now, then he could get a lot of heat, and I think it would be deserved because I think Andrew Luck has covered up a lot of warts. I'm in a battle between Wisenhunt and O'Brien, and I think that it's mainly because I love O'Brien's brain. I really like the way that guy coaches. Like what Chris said. Somebody said it, to bring up to get a 9-7 season out of that group last year with no quarterback, more or less, was kind of phenomenal. And if he can get anything out of Clowney, he's got Wilfork now on defense. I mean, this is an offensive juggernaut, so to speak, in this guy's head with a really stout defense that he doesn't really have to worry about. I think that's going to give him a leg up. I think Texans are super dangerous this year because of O'Brien. Wisenhunt's hard for me not to like. At the same time, I love Bradley. I think him getting questioned after this year would be unfair. I think a year, 2 years with Blake Bortles as a guy who should be considered a franchise quarterback, has the stature, has all the tools to become a franchise quarterback. I think that Wisenhunt's actually going to be the one that's going to be biting the bullet quicker, because if Mariota does not rise to the level of superstardom, then I think Wisenhunt's going to be highly kicked in the teeth for that one, and just as jobs go. So I'm going to put Bradley above Wisenhunt for that, because I think he has a little bit, he may not have quite as much, or he has more to work with, but I also think he's going to be able to structure what he has better than Wisenhunt, to Stone's point a little bit earlier. Jake, is there anything that you want to say before we get out of here and give everybody's information? We're closing in on about an hour and 15 minutes. And
little longer than we expected.
Yeah.
No, I just want to thank you guys for giving your feedback. I really value you guys' opinion. And when I have a project where, I bring the whole AFC South together, I definitely want to hear what my guys have to say. So I appreciate it.
Excellent. I'd like to thank anybody and everybody who watched, who's going to listen in the future. We have a real good group here, Pro Football Spot. We have 4 quality guys running their team sites, um, and we're always here to give you your opinions. And we hope that you'll get on Pro Football Spot, sign up as a member. It is free. It's a great community. Great things are coming from the website, as we've mentioned to you in weeks past. So we hope that everybody will continue to watch. We hope that you'll continue to read, and hope everybody enjoyed the broadcast and have a good night. Jake, Chris, Stoney, I'm Matt. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we will see you guys soon in the spot with the crew. Thanks, everybody.